So, you clicked the video. I'm assuming you are brand new to the game, or you recently began and you didn't really have a very structured approach. And it's a very complicated game. So, I want to sort of brush away that intimidation, right? I want to sort of give you the confidence to approach this game and also embrace the game because it's so fun. It's so worth your time, and it's not that hard to learn. Okay, so the first thing I'll say that Magic excels at, better than most of the other ones. And I played the heck out of the Pokemon TCG, the heck out of Yu-Gi-Oh TCG. I sort of understand some of the other ones, the peripheral ones, and I've sort of just been a huge nerd my whole life. Now, Magic the Gathering really does stay grounded in a way that pretty much anyone can interpret, given you have the right starting guidance, right? You need a proper compass. So what I'm going to do in this video today is I want to sort of just very slowly break down the fundamental mechanics as well as just showing you a few cards, showing you the deck building process, and just talking about each color. Um, of course, the way that turns work, how you approach winning a game of Magic, and then potentially how to have the most fun as you start learning. Okay, so thanks for clicking the video. I'm so excited to have this green screen. You have no idea. So again, if my hands look weird, also the middle teeth will like pixelate out sometimes. So bear with that, and we'll see what we can learn today. Okay, guys. So this is the starting screen. And I wanted to take you through. This is the MTG client, right? So assuming you're going to play on your computer, which I kind of highly recommend these days, this is what you'll see first. Okay, so let's click the play button and see what happens. Okay, um, boom, excellent. Now you will see that you have a bunch of different formats pop up, but we're not going to quite worry about all that. And I'll talk about the differences as we go, as we go about our business today. And just to show you, right, like these are all my decks, so I'm just gonna like kind of scroll through a little bit. Probably a little too fast, whatever. And you don't have to take note of any of this. But I just want to show you. You'll eventually have a very exuberant amount. So much so that like these are illegal, but you just don't want to get rid of them, and you'll have to just start deleting them left and right. All right, so a bunch of formats are going to pop up, but you don't need to be intimidated by the formats quite yet, okay? As you learn more about the game, you'll be able to make a more educated decision in which one you'll potentially like and get the most out of. MTG Arena does have a little bit of a different take on things compared to the in real life trading card game. You've probably heard of the format Commander, which is what most people play. And we'll get into that, okay? We'll get into that if you're brand new and if you totally don't know. But I just want to very briefly show you that there are a lot of decks that they have. Sorry, I'm going a little too fast here. Whoa! And you'll eventually be able to just pop them out, and you will not be intimidated by creating decks because the client does make it very, very easy. So let's get into. I'm actually going to go up to the top left. I'm going to click decks. You can also, I think, from there, press this plus button. This will allow you to create a new deck. Okay, so here we are with a blank slate. Assuming you know nothing about the game, this is going to be a very intimidating point of friction. Now, we're going to go up here, and I'm going to click the standard format. Again, don't worry too much about it, but standard does entail that you use cards that are legal. Now, Magic the Gathering is on a rotation, so this is what keeps the game somewhat fresh. Now, for the longest time, Magic was on a 2-year rotation. So when you would get new cards, they would be legal for 2 years. Now we're on 3-year rotation, and there are murmurs of extending that. There's also something called Magic Foundations coming out really soon, which is why I think it's probably the best time pretty much ever to get into Magic. Okay, it's doing very well. There's going to be this foundational type of set, which is going to be legal for many, many years to sort of give people the ability to latch on to certain cards without worrying about them rotating out of relevance. So there's 5 colors in Magic, guys. So what I want to do here is I'm going to press this triangle button. Many of my cards are going to come down. Now, white just happens to be the first color that it does showcase. Now, There are so many different things to talk about, so bear with me if I get a little sloppy with the order of things. But I think this is probably the way that I would approach it, okay? Let's click a random card, okay? As we learn, we want to just be experimental and we want to just sort of throw things at the wall and see what they stick. So let's pick a handful of random cards, and I'll try to pick, a few from each color, and then we'll talk about what makes them what they are, okay? And not only is there 5 colors of magic, there's also the colorless type. Ooh, don't worry, we will definitely circle back. Now, all of this stuff, if it is a little too slow, there should be breakdowns in the description, assuming I am not a lazy piece of crap. So let's grab maybe this one. We'll just grab this one. Most of these are pretty interesting. Let's grab that one. And not only are there colorless, but there's gold cards. What does this mean? It means there are multiple colors. Whoa. So you can see that some of these don't necessarily have a gold border or anything, but if you look closely, there is a weird red mana symbol there. There's a red mana symbol on this white card here. Oh, my head might be covering that one a little bit. There's a blue mana symbol right next to the word kicker on this white card. So those would be considered, dual color cards. But if we continue scrolling over, you'll start to see the actual gold border cards, which means there are 2 mana symbols in the top part of the card, which is considered the mana cost. Now, the mana cost is pretty much where we'll start today, and I will use Teferi as an example. I think that's a great example. Okay, now, let's press the triangle. We have some cute little random arrangement of cards. I did not plan this whatsoever, but I think we made some good choices, okay? So, I just said mana cost. That's where we should start as a Magic player. We need to understand that in order to play these cards, we, of course, need to have resources. And the resources to then cast the cards in this game are lands. Now, lands produce mana. Okay. So when people say, gosh, I really need a mana in order to cast this card, what they really mean is they need a land card that produces mana. Now, that seems like a weird discrepancy, but as you start learning more of the game, you will understand why phrasing and things like that come into play. So basically, all of these cards that showed up here sort of automatically are lands, okay? There are forests, there's mountains, there's swamps, there's islands, and there's plains. Now you can pretty much guess, based on the color of them, what type of cards they cast, right? The white plains will cast the white cards. The blue islands will cast the blue cards. Okay, great. That's pretty simple. Now, how many mana does Ankle Biter cost, right? This is, pretty simple. It is a 1 mana card, so we need 1 forest in order to play this card. So, how then is the game sort of dictated, right? Like, how many lands can you play in one turn? Well, every player has the ability to lay 1 land each turn. Now, unlike Pokemon, where you attach the energy cards to a Pokemon in order to use their effect, the lands are sort of like a pool that you eventually grow throughout the game. Once you lay a land, it's not going to be expended unless there's some very weird obscure effect, which of course there is, right? But pretty much 99% of the time, you lay the land, it's gonna be there for the rest of the game, and you can draw from it, right? You can use it as a resource, okay? So on turn 1, you are able to lay 1 drops in this game, like Ankle Biter, because you will be able to lay your 1 land for a turn, and then you do something which is called tapping. Okay, so this is a very important mechanic which I quite love about this game. Once you lay this 1 land, you can then tap the card. Okay, this basically signals you are deciding to use the mana that the land produces for that turn. Once you tap a card, you basically are saying to your opponent, hey, I'm going to use this 1 mana for this 1 action for this turn. You can't then like untap it and then tap it again to create another mana unless you do something tricky. So that is a basic fundamental part of Magic, right? So turn 1, we lay a forest. We're like, hey, we have an ankle biter in our hand. Tap it, boom, we can cast ankle biter. Great. Same thing with Monastery Swiftspear here, right? On turn 1, we lay a mountain. We could potentially not cast the Swiftspear, but say we want to. So we tap it, we produce a mana, we use that mana to fulfill the casting cost, and now we have a creature and we just lay it onto the field. Now, what's interesting about this guy is he has haste. What is that? We'll get into all the keywords soon, but haste actually means that the creature can attack on the first turn it's summoned. So, that would then, the the sharp amongst you will realize like, wait, so creatures can attack the first turn? Nope, unless they have haste. But we'll get into that later, okay? Now, we looked at 2 creatures, didn't we? You will notice that Ankle Biter here says creature right above where it says snake there, and Monastery Swiftspear also says creature. That is pretty obviously indicating that this is a creature card. Not only is it a creature card, but it's a permanent card. Now, there are other types of permanent cards, which is why there's an umbrella term. So there are enchantments, there are artifacts, there are planeswalkers, there are now something called battles, but you don't really have to worry about those. Teferi here happens to be a planeswalker. So he's not a creature, but he is a planeswalker. So this is considered a permanent. Now, most permanents, you know, they are sort of the main way you will eventually win a game because they stay there until removed somehow. So you can continue by attacking, right? You can attack with your creatures, or you can use the abilities of your planeswalkers over and over and over again, only once per turn, usually. Again, there's always going to be a usually thing. We'll get into planeswalkers. This is probably the most complicated type of permanent, but we'll get to that, okay? So what do we have here? Why does it say instant there? What could that be? Well, instant, actually, seeing the word instant there indicates 2 things, right? It indicates that it's not a permanent, okay? It also indicates the speed at which you can play this card. Now, as we get into how turns work, this will make a little bit more sense. But you can see it is a 1-drop as well, right? So, boom, we have a swamp, okay? We could, on turn 1, lay our swamp. Now, if we went second, and they had already laid a creature on their side of the field, we could immediately tap our swamp to generate that mana. Think of mana again as like the once per turn effect of a land. Okay, so say we want to blow up their creature right away. We tap it, boom. We can cut down their creature, assuming it has total power and toughness 5 or less. Okay, and we'll get into power and toughness. You can see that this is a 1/1 creature. Hopefully my head isn't cutting that off. It probably is. Hang on, let's move this back. You can see that this is a 1/1 creature. Okay, and this is a 1/2 creature. Now, the second number is its toughness, how much it can withstand before it dies, right? And then is removed from the battlefield. The first number is going to be how much damage it does. We'll also explain Death Touch in a little bit too. Okay, so this is not a permanent. It is something that interacts with our opponent's creatures or ours if we're doing something very weird. And this is also a card that we can cast on our opponent's turn, right? So the fact that it says instant means we can do it at instant speed, which is a term that will come up quite a bit. Anything that you can do at instant speed is usually considered bueno, very good. There's something called sorcery speed, right? If I was to just very quickly find a sorcery card, And I do want to show you that as you begin learning this game, you can actually type in like any sort of word really and filter your search that way. So I typed sorcery, which is going to have certain sorceries pop up or any card that says sorcery in their text, right? So here's an example. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so I grabbed Urborg Repossession. Now, this is a more complicated card for sure. Don't worry about the kicker and all of that. Um, but this card I cannot cast on my opponent's turn. So this has an effect that is usually slightly better than an instant. Um, but because we can't really hold up our mana, this is going to be somewhat less viable in many cases, as we can only do it on our turn during our main phase. Something I'll get into as well. Okay, so we'll come back to that, but cut down a nice little card. Um, and again, if we don't want to immediately blow up something, we can hold up our mana. The turn will pass to our opponent. The opponent can potentially lay something else, maybe a creature that's slightly better than the first one they laid. Well, then we could tap our mana on their turn, expending it, and then blow something up. Now, the idea is that when it comes back to your turn, you untap all of the mana you either had just spent or spent on your turn. We'll come back to that too. All right, let's move on to Spyglass Siren. Okay, what's going on here? Well, this is another 1/1 creature. Um, the words after the word creature will indicate the type of creature, right? So this one just happens to be a siren pirate. Those are two different creature types. That is much less important for learning the game of Magic. Very rarely will that be hugely significant unless you are building what's called a tribal deck, where they're trying to, um, say you want to make a pirate deck, right? There are some cards that benefit only pirates, so you'd sort of clump all those together and create a tribal deck. But that is, again, not as important to remember right now, okay? Now, what's interesting about this card has an enter the battlefield trigger, okay? So that is very, very good. Anything that gets you value as soon as it enters the battlefield is usually held with a higher amount of respect. Or it's usually just considered better. Now, what's good is that this also has a keyword ability, flying. So you can see now you're starting to maybe pick up. You saw Death Touch here. You saw Haste Prowess here. Prowess is a little bit more complicated, and it does give you a tooltip there. But those kind of things are nice and they are looked for when you're building your decks. So this is cool because 1/1 isn't a huge creature, but being that it has this evasive ability, you can continue flying over your opponent's creatures doing 1 damage each turn because you can only attack once per turn. And again, I will sort of come back to all that. So we sort of understand we've had some 1 drops and a couple, 2 drops. Let's go to this guy. So this is a white card that has a 1 generic and a 1 white mana in its casting cost. So the generic can be assumed with any other type of card. It can be another white mana, another white land, or it can be a white mana and maybe a green. Maybe you're playing a white green deck. So as long as you tap 1 white mana, that's the important part, and you could fulfill the other half of the casting cost with any type that you want. Now, this does become significant in the early types of games, assuming you have an open in the early part of the game, assuming you have a starting hand and you can't quite, um, you know, maybe you just don't have a white mana yet. Maybe you happen to draw 2 forests in your dual color deck. So turn 1, you lay your first forest. Turn 2, you lay your second forest, but you still haven't drawn into the white mana. Well, that means that you can't lay this 2-drop on turn 2, which is rather unfortunate. That's usually when you'd want to lay a 2-drop for generic speed. This also has lifelink. very cool keyword ability that when you do damage, you're going to gain that back. And again, don't worry, that just comes with time. But this is a larger creature, you will notice as well. Um, it is a Phyrexian cleric, a very cool creature types, but again, not very important. So, how does damage work in this game? All right, I guess we should probably talk about that a little bit before I get into the last two here. But when someone swings in, when creatures. So, contrary to what I intuitively thought, you don't actually have your creatures attack other creatures like they would in many other card games. You actually attack players, and then the players determine if they want to use their creature to block an attack. So I would be like, I declare an attack on my opponent. My opponent decides if he or she wants to throw their creature in front of the attack, so to speak. So if they had a 1/1, what would happen is my guy would do 2 damage to the 1 toughness of the opponent creature. They would go down to -1 toughness, which is 0 or below 0. At the end of the combat step, that creature would die. Now, if they did 1 damage to my 2 toughness, well, that brings 2 down to 1, and 1 is above 0, and it's not below 0. So my creature would survive at the end of combat step. Now, basically, damage is done at the same time, and then any creature that has 0 or below toughness at the end of it is then killed. There's a dies trigger, which is different than exiling, which we'll get into as well, okay? Now, there's some intricacies there, but that is how combat sort of works, and I will circle back to that, okay? So, just a very brief introduction there. So let's put, oh no. So, Scarecrow guide here. What the heck is going on here? First of all, there's 2 generic. So this is a type of card that you can throw into any color deck. So you could be playing this in a all green deck. And as long as you have 2 greens, you can tap those 2 greens once per turn, right? To then cast this. Right? Or maybe you're playing a red black deck. That's called Rakdos. You could cast this with 1 black and 1 red, or 2 reds, or 2 blacks. It basically doesn't matter as long as 2 mana is produced, right? Now, we will look at this card a little bit closer. This is a creature card that also happens to be an artifact. So we call those artifact creatures. Wow, what do you know? Now, it has a keyword ability, Reach, okay? And it also has an effect that can be activated. Now, this is a interesting effect to add 1 mana of any color. The keen amongst you might be like, well, why would I pay 1 mana? As you see, it has 1 generic there. Why would I pay 1 mana to then create 1 mana? Well, maybe you'd use this as an early game way of assuming another color of mana that you couldn't get to otherwise. Maybe you're playing a black red deck, but maybe you really need just every once in a while you need to splash to maybe get a blue and do some really weird thing, right? You could use one of those black or red manas to then create a blue mana and then cast something that needs a blue cost. So let's move on to Teferi. Teferi is a reoccurring character. There are many planeswalkers in Magic Gathering, and they have many different types, many different forms, so to speak. This is what we would call the 4 mana Teferi. You can see it takes 1 blue, 1 white, and 2 of anything to cast the card. Now, planeswalkers are very intimidating because they have all these words on them, and what's the +1, -2, -7 thing about? Well, you can see there in the bottom right of the card, it has what's called a starting loyalty. So instead of health or toughness like creatures have, loyalty or planeswalkers have loyalty. So this is, as you play the game, it'll make a little bit more sense. But you can think of that as just like the starting point for the card. So you can only use one of the abilities once per turn. Okay. So say you cast your Teferi and you immediately -2, which is a really good effect. That says you will look at the top 3 cards of your library, you'll put one of them into your hand, and you'll put the rest on the bottom. That's really good. That is a 3 card dig, they like to call it. You're getting card advantage, so you're getting another card out of your deck while establishing Teferi on the field. So that's why it's a minus ability. Usually, like minus abilities will have a little bit of a better effect. But yeah, so you just got to remember that his 4 loyalty will go down to 2 loyalty. Okay, and we'll get into a little bit more just a second. Say we cast him and we immediately +1. Well, what would we do there? Choose one artifact, well, up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. You'll untap those permanents that you control, and you'll tap the chosen permanents you don't control. You gain 2 life. Now, this is the type of effect that you really got to play a little bit of magic to really kind of understand, like, what's going on here? But basically, you can pick a bunch of your opponent's stuff to tap those down. And again, tapping is how you expend something to then get value out of it, usually, right? Like mana. Mana, you tap it, or sorry, lands, you tap it to create the mana, right? Okay. You can see even you can almost use them interchangeably because we sort of know that the end result of a land is to tap itself to create the mana. Okay, but again, it comes with time. Okay. You also gain a little bit of life, which can be kind of important, especially as you're growing the loyalty of your guy. Now, how can the opponent respond to your Planeswalker? Well, they can swing their creatures at your Planeswalker instead of attacking you. So, you have to make the decision as an attacking person to attack a player or attack a Planeswalker. But you can't do both, and you're never going to be able to do both simultaneously, right? So, they can, as a defender, they can choose to throw their creatures in front of your attack on their Planeswalker. And they can try to protect their Planeswalker with their creatures. Okay? Or they can let the swing connect and lower the loyalty of their Planeswalker. Now, once the loyalty goes to 0 or below, the Planeswalker is dead and gone. And it will go to the graveyard. Any creature or any Planeswalker that dies this way, or runs out of loyalty, runs out of toughness points in the creature's case, they will go to the graveyard. Okay. This also has an ultimate ability, which is a -7. Now you could probably tell you'd have to +3 times. You'd have to +1 3 times and defend 3 turn rotations to eventually get to the -7. Um, and then if you had 7 loyalty and you -7, you would basically kill your own Planeswalker. It's sort of like a sacrificial effort, right? But you get this really insane effect. You get an emblem that untaps all your permanents during each of your opponent's untap steps. And you draw a card during each of your opponent's draw steps. So basically, that's 2-sided. Every time your opponent draws a card, you'll draw a card, which is insane. And also, every time they untap their stuff, you'll untap your stuff again. So you can potentially get double the value of your lands and your creatures, assuming you have the ability to then play those cards or interact with those cards on your opponent's turn. And again, remember, we sort of got introduced very briefly to instant speed with this cutdown card. Now, this is a 1 mana cutdown card, but there are many other types of instant speed cards. So let me show ya some cool ones. There's creatures with flash. Now, this guy is a 7 mana card with flash. He also has some insane effects. But you could understand the power of holding this card in your hand. Your opponent swings into you thinking, oh, the coast is clear. And you're like, nope, nope, nope. Let me flash in this guy. Because flash basically means it's a creature card, or a permanent, rather, with the ability to be played at instant speed. Creatures are never going to say instant next to them. Flash is sort of like the permanent equivalent of instant. Okay. Um, so yeah, so there we go. Or so just to stay in the color of black that has really good removal type of instance, you could see the power of exiling one of your opponent's creatures, and potentially scrying two if we control an enchantment. I'll get into those in a little bit. But you can see the power of doing that right before the turn is passed back to us, right? We would need to hold up at least two black lands that produce black mana, and then two of anything else. But doing that at the end step of the opponent's turn is a huge, and I cannot underestimate, momentum swing. Magic is a game of turns. It's a game of momentum, and it's very unique in the way that we can do things on our opponent's turn, assuming we have instant speed, right? Again, we sort of went over flash. That's also a very powerful thing to do. Is all of a sudden there's a creature now, and now the turn's coming to me, and I can lay another creature if I want to. So instant speed, not to be sneezed at. Another cool card here. This says up to one target creature gets -X until end of turn. Wow, there's an X in the casting cost. What are we doing? We'll get into that. If X is 5 or more, return a creature card with mana value X or less from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. You will see X's quite a bit. And if you're really, really bad at algebra, never fret. It's pretty simple here. It's not even really algebra, don't worry. Say their creature on the opponent's side of the field that's causing us problems has 3 toughness. If we cast this for 1 black mana, and then 3 more mana, so 4 total, we'd be able to -3 the opponent's creature. Since they only had 3 toughness, they would then go to 0, and that creature would die. And we could do that at instant speed again right before the turn is passed to us, right? Now, if we wanted to bring back a creature card from our graveyard, we'd have to cast this for a total of 6 mana. Because 1 for the black, and then 5 more to make sure that the value of X is 5. Okay? So basically, this is intended to be an early game removal card until you hit that 6 mana threshold, and then we can also, at the same time of removing something, get one of our creatures. A little bit more of a complicated card, or interaction rather, but that's how that works. So now, we've gone over creatures, we've gone over very briefly the fact that artifacts exist as well. Let's show you artifacts that aren't creatures. So I grabbed a couple artifacts to look at, and this first one here is going to sort of show you that they're not always colorless. Now, there are a lot of colorless artifacts in Magic. There don't always have to be. This is a very cool equipment as well, which is another type, a subtype of a card. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. But I brought one more here, or actually 2 more. This is a 1 mana artifact that sort of gives your creatures the ability to sort of ping your opponents for 1 damage, or ping their opponent's creatures for 1 damage as they block it, right? Now there's an equip cost. So we'd have to use 1 mana to get this card on the field, and then later on our turn, probably, or on a further turn, or maybe on that same turn, if we have access to a lot of mana, maybe we're late in the game, we'd have to pay 1 more to equip it to one of our creatures. So that's how equip works, and that's when the text box would then actually take effect, because again, it does read equipped creature has boom, boom, bam. Now, you will see that there is a 1 there as well, so they will have to pay another mana to take advantage of it once it's equipped. A little bit of a complicated one there. So we're on to enchantments. This is a good example of an enchantment here. It's one of the types of permanents, so it's going to sort of just stick around until removed with some very specific card effect. And what this does is it doesn't do anything passively. You will notice that the effect only happens if we pay additional mana. So right, we cast this for 1 mana, and then later on, usually as starting on turn 3, right, because it is a 3 casting ability or costing ability, we could actually return permanents that we control um, to the other's hand. So we can bounce our things back to our own hand. Why would we want to do that? Well, this is not a great example, but maybe we have our friend Spyglass Siren over here that we talked about at the beginning. Maybe we desperately, for some weird reason, you wouldn't really be doing this, but we want to bring back our one mana guy, have him enter the battlefield again because we desperately need a map token for some weird reason, right? Well, we could potentially do that with this effect. Now, again, you don't really want to be spending 3 mana to then get back a 1-drop and then spend another mana to let your 1-drop. That's not a very impactful play, but it's something you could do if you really needed to for whatever reason. This type of card is definitely designed to have, the other cards in your deck need to be enter the battlefield related triggers. They need to benefit from entering the battlefield over and over and over again. So very weird. You will see there that it says activate only during your turn. So even though it's an instant speed ability, because there's not a tap icon next to it, that's a very minute detail that's hard for players at the beginning. But if the ability is, if it has a tap thing, just ignore that for now. Okay, quickly moving on. Curious inquiry. What's going on here? Why does it say aura next to the enchantment? Well, this is an enchantment that you will equip, essentially. You will put on to your creature. It's different than equipping, right? Because usually equipment has an equip cost. This is slightly different, but it's pretty much the same thing going on, okay? But there are a lot of minute differences in Magic, so it's important to kind of understand that these are considered different actions. So, what does this do? Whenever enchanted creature, it's considered an enchanted creature now, it gets +1/+1, which raises its power and toughness, and whenever it deals damage, you will investigate. And investigating, you will see by the tooltip above my head there, which is very cool. Magic is really good with this. It does say create a colorless clue artifact token with 2 mana, 2 sacrifice, draw a card. So basically, you get a permanent. You will see that it does, right? It shows you what it creates there, that clue. This is considered a token artifact. We'll get into tokens a little bit as well. It sort of just gives you more resources later on in the game. When you have nothing better to do, you can at least spend 2 of your excess mana to draw a card, which is really powerful. Drawing cards is always good, okay? You will learn very quickly that drawing cards is one of the most powerful things you can do in the game. Unlike many other card games, it's where you just like refilling your hand all the time. That doesn't quite happen in Magic the Gathering. Now, what is this? Why did I bring this up? Well, you can see that this card is a creature that is very much meant to be played with enchantments. Every time you cast an enchantment spell, we're putting a 1/1 counter on target creature. Now, counters are like permanent buffs. There are ability counters now, which you can put like, let's go back to our early examples. Aha! One of the homies here, hey, that puts it behind. This has lifelink. There are lifelink counters that you can put on something, which, just keyword ability stuff, which we will get into. But this guy very much meant to be an early drop that is going to help your other more important creatures grow as you just sort of spam the field with enchantments. Enchantments is a very fun archetype, so I'm glad we sort of got through that. Now, there's also things called sagas. Now, I'm not going to go through like everything. I know this video is probably already getting a little too long, but I might as well just be as comprehensive as I can, and I hope you maybe come back to the video and reference certain parts as you continue learning. And maybe things that I'm saying that don't make sense quite right now will down the road. So this is a 3-part effect. So when you cast this card, the first chapter is going to take effect, okay? And that is you may play an additional land this turn. So say it's turn 2, right? For 1 green and 1 of anything else, you cast this card. Well, if you have another land in your hand, you can immediately put that down. If you have a 1-drop in your hand after that, you could then tap that new land to lay that 1-drop. So that's cool. You gain 3 life. Now, that second chapter is going to trigger once the turn comes back to you. Because at the beginning of your upkeep, which is a phase of your turn at the very start, you will put the lore counter on it, which triggers the second chapter. Seems kind of convoluted, but it's pretty much just like, hey, at the beginning of your turn, the next chapter starts. And then on chapter 3, exile this saga, then return it to the battlefield, transformed under your control. I moved my head a little bit so we could see that it is a enchantment creature now, a human monk enchantment creature with an ability that is a 3/3, which is, a respectable creature size for, again, an original 2 mana investment. You'll see that nowhere on this does it require us to spend more mana, but now later on, after quite a while, we have a 3/3. So, whenever Likeness of the Seeker becomes blocked, untap up to 3 lands you control. Now, this can be really powerful. Say this guy stuck around a couple turns. Maybe it's turn 5. You have 5 or 6 mana available. Because, again, you can find ways of getting other lands that aren't just using your 1 land per turn. Say you have, let's say 6 mana available. You tap all those, right? You lay a 6-drop or something. Well, you untap 3 more. You can then lay a 3-drop on that same turn. Again, big momentum swing, and also doubling up the value of your lands for that turn. So pretty cool effect. Also, the fact that it's an enchantment creature helps to synergize with many cards that care about it. Okay, so I clicked the land section here. Now, don't want to lose you here, but there's like legendary lands, there's creature lands, there's dual lands that give you access to 2 different colors. Now, I actually went and clicked Timeless to showcase some of the older cards, but there are really cool things happening here. Now, let's start with this. So this is a dual-sided card that can be cast as a land, right? That can help eventually start ramping you. Or maybe you have a hand that has a decent amount of land, or you have a certain type of deck that is consistently going to produce land. You could cast the second half, or the first half, I guess, of this card, which is the creature. So you'll get a 1/3 creature that does gain you a little bit of life when it enters the battlefield. Now, this is cool because the flexibility that this provides is massive. Because again, you only start with 7 cards in your hand, and it's very important to have, a critical mass of lands. If you're a low to the ground deck, maybe you're pretty much relying on your 2-drops and your 3-drops to be like your main value guys, and you're not really trying to get up to like 5 and 6 mana. So maybe you can benefit way more from just laying this as a creature, right? Because you'll probably get to 3 mana eventually. Or maybe you're a deck that really relies on their 6-drops or 7-drops to really just bang home the game. Those are called bombs, or big threats, huge high value cards that have usual game ending type of momentum, right? Then maybe you want to just lay this as a land, and maybe you won't have an impactful early game, but you'll eventually down the road get to the you'll achieve the ability to cast those things before the game ends, before you lose, right? I'm sorry, but you can turn this into a 7/7 blue giant creature with Ward 3. Now, Ward 3 is sort of like a protection thing. The opponent will have to pay 3 mana to target our guy with any of their effects or abilities or spells, right? So you have this big 7/7 with a little bit of protection. You will see that it says it's still a land. So that means it's simultaneously a land and a creature at the same time. So that's also important because anything that says destroy target creature, well, now it's a creature. Anything that says destroy target land, well, it's still a land. So the 7/7 creature just gets removed like any sort of land removal effect. Okay, so that's why it's very important, the wording and the arrangement of wording on Magic cards, but that sort of just comes with time. Now this is a really good card that actually did quite a lot when it was in Standard. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island. Now, usually in a mono blue deck, right? Let's put this over here as well. So in a mono blue deck, you are going to be pretty much never worrying about that downside unless like you only have one mana in your hand. It happens to be this one. You probably wouldn't take that hand, right? So this is only like really bad if you're playing like a multicolored deck, um, and you just happen to get this one as your first blue source. So yeah, the upside is that for 4 mana, you can scry too. Now, there's scrying, there's surveilling, there is filter effects, there's different types of interaction with the top and bottom of your library. But scry and surveil are sort of the two main ones. Scry just means you look at the top two cards of your library. It is above me actually, and you put any number of them on the bottom, the rest on top. So say you want both of them on top, perfect. You can keep them both on top. Or, say you just want one of them and one on the bottom, you can do that too, because maybe you didn't want this other one. And not only that, you can arrange the order if you keep both of them on top. Or if you just hate both of them, throw them to the bottom, right? Very powerful effect. Not as powerful as surveilling. Surveilling is essentially the same thing, except you can put them into your graveyard rather than keep them on top, which is really powerful in decks that use their graveyard as a resource. So that's almost indirectly drawing them because you're sort of putting them in a place where you can then obtain value from them much more easily in certain types of decks, usually black decks that have graveyard recursion. So very cool. So we covered a lot, and maybe I should have started with this type of, or at least maybe mentioned this before. But here's a creature that has a tap symbol on it, and you can tap the creature to produce mana. Now, that's important because the creature then cannot swing. Swinging taps your creature. So, whenever you declare an attack, you will tap the creature, which means you can't then get any other value from the creature. You're sort of committed to the attack, and the value in question would be that green mana. So, with this guy, you need to decide, do I want to attack with him, or do I want to tap him on my turn to then just ramp, we'll use the term ramp into something bigger, and potentially with the lands I already have and then this one extra mana, lay a card that was slightly out of reach before. So you will see there are cards like this. This card taps to create a mana of any color, which is really powerful. This allows you to play a primarily green deck because, at least to lay them on turn 2 or whatever, you need a green. And it also has the upside of making your target lands 3/3s, which is sort of a complicated effect. Don't worry about that too much. Okay, so you made it through a lot of jibber jabber, a lot of blabbing about card types and all that. Now we should probably talk about how turns work very intricately. So at the start of someone's turn, there is an upkeep phase. This is where you untap everything. So that's why you sort of grow your mana pool, right? Each turn you lay one of your lands, you tap it that turn to get some sort of value if you can or if you want to, and then your turn comes back to you eventually. You untap everything and you start from there. Then you lay a second land, a third land, a fourth land as your turns go on. So there are instant speed shenanigans you can do during the upkeep before you draw, for example. A great example right now is there's a card called Sholdred who will ping you for 2 damage every time you draw a card. Well, before you draw a card on your turn, there's that upkeep phase. So you could remove the Sholdred, before you go to draw your card on what is your draw phase, avoiding that 2 damage. You see? So if you untap your mana right before you draw a card and then immediately use the mana at instant speed to get rid of that Shouldred, you will be dodging 2 damage that you wouldn't have dodged otherwise. So there's the upkeep phase, then the draw phase, then there's your main phase. Okay? Now, the main phase is when most things happen. It's also the phase when you can declare attacks. But the important thing to remember is that you have 2 main phases on your turn. So there is basically the combat step in between your main phase. Because once you declare an attack, you're basically ending your main phase for 99% of interactions. There's ways of sneaking in other phases in between phases with some pretty insane cards. There's multiple combat step type of things. But those are so rare that just pretend they don't exist, right? So once you declare an attack, your first main phase is going to end. Now you don't have to declare an attack before you interact with your opponent's board. You can interact with your opponent's board to clear the way for your attack, right? And then maybe at the end of the attack, your opponent did something sneaky, right? Well, they maybe removed one of your creatures at instant speed, or maybe the combat step didn't work out because they did a flashy play and they buffed one of their creatures and things are bad. Well, now during your second main phase, you have the ability to lay something or blah 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 blah. Now, just flash forward. What I'm trying to get to, it's usually better to try to lay things as late as possible in Magic the Gathering. So there are sorcery cards that we talked about, right? I have like an example here. This is a spell card, not a permanent card. I don't even know if I mentioned that earlier, so my apologies if I didn't. But there are spell cards, permanent cards, right? Which is very important. This is something you can only do during your main phases. So sorcery speed is basically main phase speed. Okay. This has kicker. So for extra 2 mana, 1 being green, you'd be able to return another target permanent card from the graveyard. Because you can see you turn a creature card normally, and then if you kick it, you return another card that can be a permanent. So it could be a creature or a enchantment. Blah blah blah. A little bit more complicated. Kicker just means you can spend extra mana to get more value out of it if you have the ability to do so. This does sort of require you to play a green black deck, right, in order to get rid of the second half. So you don't necessarily have to do that. But again, that extra flexibility is usually very important in Magic the Gathering. So there's sort of that combat step in between. You have your second main phase, lay anything else. You can lay a creature, you can lay anything really. You can keep up your mana, pass to your opponent, do something on your opponent's turn. It's a very flexible game, and there's of course your end step, which you've basically already committed to. You're like, okay, so I've moved to my end step. I can't lay anything on sorcery speed. I can't cast any more creatures or permanents or whatever unless they have flash. And your opponent could then do something right before, again, it passes to them. Remember that. Because that, again, is that huge momentum swing I'm talking about. They could flash out a creature. They could do something instant speed. And I've already committed to passing the turn, basically. And now they're going to their turn with momentum already established. They're going in, untapping their stuff, untapping their resources, and achieving even more. Okay? So Magic's a game of momentum. There's a lot of different card types. There's a lot going on. There's cards like this where you have the main card there, which is a 5 mana enchantment, but you also have a 2 mana instant in the bottom left corner there, which is sort of like, hey, early in the game you can flash out essentially because it does say create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. It's an instant speed spell that creates a 2/2 creature. You're not casting a creature, you're casting an instant speed spell that happens to create a creature. So there's very important distinctions like that, right? This guy has vigilance, very cool keyword. And I haven't gone over all the keywords yet. Perhaps I'll do that in the next video because I think we're getting a little too long-winded here. But I will have a second follow-up to this. I really enjoyed this. I have tons of standard decks on my channel. If you wanted to maybe listen to the intros of those at least, I will sort of talk about what makes a card good and why I justify my decisions. And as you learn about what card makes the cut or what types of cards make the cut in these types of decks, you'll sort of subconsciously understand what's valuable and what isn't valuable. I try to do a good job with sort of going over each card. Sometimes I talk a little fast, and I am sort of assuming that you've already played Magic the Gathering, but it wouldn't hurt. And again, more of these type of things are going to be coming out. I hope the green screen effects weren't too horrible, and I had fun doing that. I know I was a little all over the place. I'm trying to I'm going to do my best to edit all this stuff in a coherent way. And yeah, much love, you guys. There's going to be a Light No Fire video so soon, I promise. Now that I figured out the green screen and all of that, because Magic the Gathering is my passion, but I also quite love No Man's Sky and of course the upcoming Light No Fire. My two great loves. So hopefully I can blend the communities together. Thank you so much for being so supportive, and I really hope you give this game a shot. I did want to, before I leave you, right? All right, so there, I wipe the slate clean. There's a few things I promised you before the video ends. Now I need to cover the fact that you can have only 4 of each card in your decks in standard, right? Commander, you have 1 of each card, so it's a little bit more simple. But if you're going to be playing standard format, 4 is the number of copies you can have, which sort of allows you to be flexible with the consistency. So say you like this card but you don't love it, well, you could cut the copies in half and go down to 2. Okay? Say you were doing some testing and you're like, hey, this card isn't that great, you can cut it down to 1. Maybe you have effects that help you search your deck for a specific card. Well, maybe you know that that card will, no matter what, get you to that 1 copy, and maybe that copy will get you value as soon as it hits the field. That's usually the type of card you don't need multiple copies of, right? Especially the higher you go in casting costs, you're not going to need like 4 ofs usually. So that's something to consider. And as you click around, I do want to show you, right? Now that I've clicked a black card, it put, you know, it has 1 black card and 1 white card in here. It cut the lands in half. And 24 is going to be that magic number for most decks. So you can see we have 12 swamps, 12 plains. So that's something to consider. If I was to click a card that has, let's go to green. It's going to then just cut it into thirds. It's going to assume like, hey, on turn 3, you'll probably have access to 2 greens. Again, there's also dual lands. So, right, if you wanted to then put in some Golgari cards, right, which is green and black, you could throw this in here. It would make a lot of sense considering you already have green and black cards, right? So this wouldn't be unrealistic to cast, etc., etc. Here's those dual lands I was kind of talking about. They'll usually enter the battlefield tapped as a downside, so you don't have ability to get your mana from the land right away, but then you can untap it once you get back to your turn rotation, right? And now you have access to both, which is huge and not to be sneezed at. This card also has an effect on it as a land, which you can turn this land into a 4/4 creature until end of turn. Not only that, when it attacks, you create a food token. Very good card because it's a land that provides you value early game. It has an effect on it that could potentially help you win a combat trade early or mid game. And then later on, that food token can be a late game mana sink to at least gain you a little bit of life. You will learn about food tokens and all the different types of tokens as you continue playing. There's cards like this, which force you to play these 3 colors. Now, usually it's very hard to build a mana base where you can consistently, especially starting on earliest turn 3, get all these guys, right? You'd need to have maybe a black and a red in your starting hand, and then maybe you need to draw into a green or have another way of creating a green mana, maybe from one of your creatures to do something like this. Now, the other thing is there are these sets, and there is rotation, okay? So we are actually approaching finally a rotation happening. I believe, do not quote me 100%, but I'm pretty dang sure Dominaria United down, so Streets of New Capenna, Kamigawa, Innistrad, uh, and Innistrad again, it's just different ones, are going to be rotating out. So that means that Brothers War and everything above should stay legal for a while longer. Again, it's you can find the rotation dates and all of that on like wizardsofthecoast.com. There's many other websites that cover it pretty close, but this is where you'd see where the cards come from. The most recent set to come out is Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and again, this is for standard. For timeless, and commander in real life, all that in modern, blah blah blah, you can use pretty much any card. There are ban lists for each format, so that's something to consider as a new player too. If you're going to invest heavily into one type of format, make sure you check the ban list before you buy a bunch of expensive cards, things like that. You can also very easily check the different types of cards when you go to search by going here and then clicking, like maybe you want to see all the rares that you have, all the mythic rares that you have. Well, you can click both those, and then when you go back by clicking OK, you will only see rares. Rares are actually indicated by the gold color of the symbol, right? You can see the symbol there in the middle next to Lurgoyf there. This one has the Innistrad symbol in the center there. This is one of the recent lands. It has sort of the cowboy hat from Outlaws of Thunder Junction there, that gold symbol. So you'll start to understand that the colors indicate the rarity, and then the shape or the actual symbol itself dictates what set it's from. Holy! So I'm running out of out of steam. This is a mythic rare because it has that cool orange color to it, right? Cat avatar. Ooh. So there's a lot going on in Magic Gathering. I don't want you to be overwhelmed. The client makes it pretty easy to get started. The other thing I'd say is just by playing on the client, you'll eventually unlock like gold, and they'll give you a bunch of starting decks and stuff. So pick your favorite like couple colors, mess around with them, and then once you achieve the ability, you'll get these wild cards, rare and mythic wild cards, right? You can see up here I have 0 rares and 0 mythics. I've spent them all, but I have 269 uncommons. So any uncommon that comes out, I can grab it. Not to worry about it. You'll eventually get more than you need of those. Mythics and rares are always going to be, you're always going to be basically needing those, and that's how they make their money. But you will be able to, without much effort, put together a pretty viable deck. And as long as you're pretty conscientious of which sets you're getting, you'll eventually have a deck that you can use for 30 years very confidently. And then if any of the cards rotate out, you'll be playing the game. You'll have ways of replacing those cards. The format's always changing, so you don't need to be like, this is the absolute perfect deck list that I need in order to be competitive. That's not at all true. I've thrown together decks without any mythic or rares and done very good. There's a human deck right now that, heck, you could pretty much build it with no mythic and rares and do just fine. Trust me. Mono red, if you want to be a mono red one of those, go for it. You can do the same without many rares or anything like that. Very low to the ground cards that are going to win quickly. There's best of 1 format. There's best of 2 format. There's something called the sideboard. When you're playing best of 3, you'll be able to, in between the games, change out some of the cards that you think, maybe this doesn't work as good, but maybe this will work a little bit better. So you can have up to 15 cards in your sideboard, unless they change that. Maybe it's 7 now. I think they did do some sideboard changes that I wasn't fully aware of. I usually play best of 1. It's a little bit quicker, and if you get into a matchup you don't like, you just lose the game and get out of there and move on to the next game, right? So much love, you guys. I know I was all over the place. But I had a lot of fun. I hope the green screen wasn't too off-putting. I hope my teeth weren't pixelated. And yeah, there will be definitely a part two where I talk about more of the intricacies and how to actually put together a deck. And I'll put together a deck in the video so you can see every decision I make. And again, I have tons of standard content that, again, by just listening to me blab and sort of, talk about which card makes the cut, you'll subconsciously start to learn, like, okay, so this is more viable than that. And oh, okay, so he did this for this reason. And you'll start to begin a natural, organic you'll start spinning the wheels. And the game has so much depth to it while being very approachable, in my opinion. Um, Games like Yu-Gi-Oh are infinitely more complicated. The text box are twice as large. Um, I've actually been following Yu-Gi-Oh a lot. I really love Team APS on YouTube. They're freaking awesome. Go check out Team APS if you have any interest. Uh, and the Professor for Magic the Gathering is a great place to start if you're completely brand new. And I would also have to recommend Strictly Better MTG. Dev is the GOAT. He's the best to ever do it. Go check out Dev's videos at Strictly Better MTG. Um, there's just so many great channels out there that play, different card games and things like that. And don't be scared by them. You will definitely be able to build a very prominent card pool. I have so many rares and mythics that I have to use in different formats now, but just hold such a place in my heart, and I don't regret getting any of them. I had so many cool decks over the years. A lot of fun figuring out different metas and all of that. And it's really, you don't need to invest that much money or anything to really get there. Just by playing a lot, being passionate, you'll get there. Every once in a while, do some drafts. You'll unlock some cool rares and stuff from doing drafts. And IRL Magic, if you want to really learn about the game, just go sit at a card shop on a Friday night when they do Friday Night Magic and just talk to some of the nerds, man. The nerds will love to just show you all their cards, and someone will definitely sit with you and walk you through it if you need to be walked through it. People love to do that. It might be a little scary, but heck yeah, man. You know, you're never gonna know how deep the pool is until you dive head first. Something like that. Don't do that. You'll crack your head. But you know what I'm saying. Anyway, all right. I'm gonna drink some water. I think I'm having a stroke. And see you in the next video, guys. Peace.